The Greek world was on the brink of irrevocable change. The two greatest powers of the era, Athens and Sparta, had walked a fine line between peace and conflict for years. Now, this delicate balance was about to collapse. At the heart of the 5th century BCE, Greece was a mosaic of independent city-states, each with its own interests. Yet two forces dominated the scene: Athens, with its naval and cultural supremacy, and Sparta, the land power that embodied military tradition and discipline. After decades of shared glory, particularly during the struggle against the Persians, the two cities began to grow distrustful of one another. Athens, leading the Delian League, consolidated its position in the Greek world, demanding tributes from its allies and expanding its maritime influence. Many perceived this hegemony as the rise of an empire. For Sparta and its allies, this was intolerable. Sparta, on the other hand, headed the Peloponnesian League, comprising cities that shared its desire to preserve independence in the face of Athenian expansion. The Spartans valued simplicity and military strength, while watching with increasing concern the wealth and ambitions of Athens. For years, minor skirmishes fueled the resentment between the two powers, but three key events ignited the spark that would lead to war. The Corcyraean War, 433 BCE. Athenian ally Corcyra clashed with Corinth, a member of the Peloponnesian League. When Athens intervened, Sparta viewed this as a direct act of aggression. The Siege of Potidaea, 432 BCE. Athens besieged Potidaea, a city attempting to rebel against the Delian League. Sparta saw this siege as a blatant display of Athenian authoritarianism. The Megarian decree, Athens imposed harsh trade sanctions on Megara, a Spartan ally, crippling its economy and further escalating tensions. These incidents made it clear that peace was unsustainable. The balance was shattered, and the Spartans believed that only war could restore order. Sparta gathered its allies and resolved that war was inevitable. Spartan military leaders were confident they could force Athens into submission by ravaging its lands and cutting off its resources. Their strategy was straightforward: repeatedly invade Attica until Athens was compelled to negotiate. Meanwhile, in Athens, Pericles, the city's leader, devised a radical response. He ordered the rural population of Attica to retreat within the city walls. Athens would not confront Sparta directly on land. Instead, it would rely on its navy to secure supplies and strike vulnerable points in the Peloponnesus. This strategy, though bold, divided Athenian opinion. Many feared the consequences of abandoning their lands, but Pericles was steadfast in his belief that this was the only way to withstand Sparta's superior land forces. With armies mobilizing and strategies taking shape, Greece entered a war that would test the limits of courage and endurance. This was only the beginning of a conflict whose echoes would resonate for generations. The tension had given way to action. Sparta was marching, and Athens was bracing itself to resist. The confrontation was about to begin, and the first blow would be felt in the very heart of Attica. With war officially declared, there was no room left for negotiation. Troops were on the move, and the first blow would be felt in the very heart of Athens. At the outset of the war, Sparta relied on its formidable land forces to break Athens. The Spartans, led by King Archidamus II, marched through Attica, laying waste to fields and crops. This show of power was intended to demoralize Athens and pressure its citizens into swift negotiations. However, Sparta's plan encountered an unanticipated obstacle: Athens's long walls. Pericles, steadfast in his strategy, had commanded the rural population to take refuge within the fortifications. While their lands were ravaged, the Athenians remained secure behind their walls, watching helplessly as the countryside burned. Outside the city, the scenes were devastating. Farms set aflame, crops reduced to ash, and villages abandoned. Yet within the walls, the resolve of the Athenians only grew stronger. Pericles urged the citizens to remain calm, reminding them that Athens' navy would ensure supplies and deliver retribution in due time. While Sparta ravaged Attica, a critical battle unfolded in another part of Greece. The small city of Plataea, loyal to Athens, became the target of a Spartan siege. Plataea was strategically significant, located in Boeotia, and its defiance became a symbol of resistance against Sparta's overwhelming might. Allied with Theban forces, the Spartans surrounded the city, expecting a swift victory. Yet the citizens of Plataea were determined to stand their ground. For months, the Plataeans mounted a fierce defense. They improvised fortifications, repelled assaults, and even launched daring sorties to sabotage enemy forces. However, the city was isolated, and its supplies began to dwindle. Inside the walls, the Plataeans faced harrowing choices: hunger, disease, and the constant specter of destruction. Yet their resistance endured, fueled by the hope that Athens might come to their aid. As Plataea fought for survival, Sparta's strategy in Attica began to reveal its shortcomings. Athens' long walls, combined with its formidable navy, turned the Spartan approach into a test of endurance. Despite the economic losses and the devastation of the countryside, Athens remained unbroken, defying Spartan expectations. The war, which many had assumed would be brief, already showed signs of becoming a protracted and grueling conflict. The early stages of the war left deep scars. The lands of Attica burned under the Spartan advance, while the citizens of Plataea displayed extraordinary courage in the face of siege. Yet neither Sparta nor Athens appeared willing to concede. The true nature of the conflict was just beginning to emerge. With Attica's fields laid waste and Plataea isolated, the war escalated. Survival and resistance became the immediate priorities, but unforeseen developments would soon present new challenges for both sides. Amid the war, the Athenian navy sought to exploit Sparta's vulnerabilities. Far from the walls of Athens, a strategic point along the Peloponnesian coast became the stage for an unexpected turning point. In 425 BCE, Athens launched a daring offensive. An Athenian fleet, commanded by Demosthenes, sailed along the Peloponnesus and decided to fortify Pylos, a strategically located region on Spartan territory. Beyond its advantageous position, Pylos was near Messenia, home to Helot slaves whose rebellion Sparta feared above all else. The Athenian occupation of Pylos sent shockwaves through Sparta. Not only was its territory now exposed, but the symbolic weight of this challenge directly undermined its military prestige. In response, Sparta quickly dispatched troops to reclaim the area, while Athens fortified its hold. The initial clashes were fierce. The Spartans attempted to encircle Pylos by both land and sea, confident in their ability to overpower the Athenians. However, Demosthenes' improvised defenses, combined with the rugged terrain, thwarted Spartan advances. As the siege dragged on, Athens made a bold move. Its fleet successfully blockaded the strait between Pylos and the island of Sphacteria, trapping hundreds of Spartan soldiers on the island. This maneuver turned the conflict into a standoff. Unaccustomed to such circumstances, Sparta found itself in an unprecedented situation. Its soldiers, stranded on the island, faced hunger, exhaustion, and relentless attacks from the Athenian fleet. Spartan reinforcements, unable to break the blockade, began to lose momentum. The siege culminated in a decisive battle. Under the leadership of Cleon and Demosthenes, the Athenians launched a direct assault on Sphacteria, engaging the Spartans in close combat. Despite their legendary reputation for invincibility, the Spartan soldiers, isolated and weakened, could not withstand the Athenian onslaught. For the first time in history, Spartan soldiers surrendered. For Athens, this was a monumental victory, not only strategically, but also symbolically. The surrender of Spartan warriors shattered the myth of their invulnerability and boosted Athenian morale to new heights. The triumph at Sphacteria shifted the balance of the war. Humiliated, Sparta sought ways to recover its standing, while Athens reveled in its moment of glory. Yet the war was far from over, and new battles loomed on the horizon. Pylos and Sphacteria marked a turning point. The myth of Spartan invincibility had been broken, and Athens basked in its newfound glory. But war, as always, had its way of balancing the scales. Despite Athens' celebration, challenges remained. Sparta, wounded in pride but resilient, still had strategies to employ, and the conflict continued with renewed intensity. As the conflict expanded, the war was no longer confined to the battlefields. It began testing the loyalties, spirit, and resilience of the city-states. In Athens, the enemy came not only from without, but also from within. In 428 BCE, the city of Mytilene, located on the island of Lesbos and an ally of Athens, decided to rebel against the rule of the Delian League. Dissatisfied with the imposed tributes and encouraged by the prospect of Spartan support, Mytilene's leaders declared independence and called upon allies to join their cause. Athens responded swiftly, deploying its navy to suppress the revolt. The siege of Mytilene was fierce, and after months of resistance, the city was forced to surrender. When the news of victory reached Athens, the city's leaders faced a grave dilemma. How should the rebels be treated? The debate in Athens was heated. Some proposed severe punishment, including the execution of all the men and the enslavement of women and children, as a stark warning to other cities. Others, led by more moderate voices, argued that clemency would demonstrate moral strength and political wisdom. Ultimately, the extreme punishment was rejected. The leaders of the revolt were executed, and Mytilene was subjected to harsh control. The decision exposed not only the internal divisions in Athens, but also how the war amplified political and ethical tensions. While Athens grappled with revolts and managed its league, an unexpected threat emerged within its own walls. In 430 BCE, a devastating plague struck the city. The overcrowding caused by Pericles' strategy of bringing the rural population inside the walls created ideal conditions for the disease to spread. The plague spared no one. Men, women, and children perished in great numbers. Corpses piled up in the streets, and the social order began to unravel. Athens, so confident in its strength, seemed to be unraveling from within. It is estimated that a third of Athens' population succumbed to the plague, including Pericles himself, who died in 429 BCE. With his death, Athens lost not only its most prominent military and political leader, but also the principal architect of its wartime strategy. Inside the walls, despair reigned. The plague's impact was so profound that for a time it seemed the city was on the brink of collapse. Yet despite the devastation, Athens endured. The navy remained operational and the war continued. The combination of the Mytilenean revolt and the plague exposed Athens' vulnerabilities. Its grip on its allies was weakening, and its population was diminished and traumatized. Yet these events also highlighted the city's resilience. Even in the face of catastrophe, Athens held its ground. The war was not just a test of arms and strategies, but also of spirit. Athens faced external enemies and internal crises, while Sparta watched, ready to exploit every weakness. Tensions mounted, and the conflict advanced with no end in sight. With the scars of the plague and internal instability, the war entered a new phase. While Sparta sought to strengthen its position, Athens, though shaken, was not ready to yield. The next stage would bring decisive battles and unexpected twists. When the forces of Athens and Sparta clashed near Amphipolis, the dust stirred by the movement of troops barely concealed the tension in the air. This would be a decisive confrontation, not only for its strategic significance, but for the fates of two of the war's most renowned leaders. Amphipolis, located in the region of Thrace, was a highly coveted prize in the Peloponnesian War. Rich in mineral resources such as silver and gold and strategically positioned on a vital trade route, the city was a critical point for controlling both maritime and land routes. Athens had captured Amphipolis in the past, establishing a military base to safeguard its interests. Recognizing the city's importance, Sparta decided the time had come to seize it. The mission was entrusted to Brasidas, a brilliant strategist and one of Sparta's most respected military leaders. Brasidas understood that victory in Amphipolis would not only weaken Athens, but also bolster Spartan morale, worn down by years of a protracted and exhausting war. Brasidas led a force composed of veteran Spartan hoplites, bolstered by allied contingents from northern Greek cities. Although outnumbered by the Athenian army, his tactical acumen and leadership more than compensated for the disparity. On the Athenian side, General Cleon commanded the forces. Known for his ambition and impulsive leadership style, Cleon brought a larger army comprising hoplites and auxiliary troops. However, his military experience was often questioned, and his decision to personally lead the campaign was criticized in Athens as a political move to enhance his reputation. Brasidas avoided direct confrontation with the Athenians. Instead, he employed defensive strategies, positioning his forces to exploit the terrain around Amphipolis. The city was situated in a hilly region, and he used the elevations to conceal a portion of his troops, setting an ambush. Cleon, by contrast, appeared overconfident. Believing in his numerical superiority, he advanced without properly surveying the terrain. This haste would prove to be his undoing. When the battle commenced, Brasidas launched a swift and unexpected assault. Part of his forces engaged the Athenian army head-on, while the hidden troops descended from the hills to flank the enemy. The maneuver threw the Athenian ranks into disarray. Cleon attempted to reorganize his troops, but his lack of military expertise became apparent. As he ordered a disorderly retreat, he was struck by a spear and died on the battlefield. His death plunged the Athenians into panic, and the retreat devolved into a desperate rout. Despite the Spartan victory, it came at a heavy cost. Brasidas, leading the frontal charge to inspire his troops, was grievously wounded during the fight. He was carried back to Amphipolis, where, before succumbing to his injuries, he learned of the victory. For Sparta, his death was both a triumph and a tragedy. The victory at Amphipolis was a strategic success for Sparta. Athens lost a key point in its defensive and territorial network. However, the death of Brasidas deprived Sparta of one of its most talented commanders, while Cleon's death created a leadership void in Athens, especially among advocates for a more aggressive war strategy. Both sides felt the battle's impact. Sparta consolidated its position in northern Greece, but lacked the strength for a decisive offensive. Athens, though weakened, retained control of the seas. The Battle of Amphipolis not only determined the fate of a city, but also exposed the weaknesses and sacrifices defining this endless war. Brasidas and Cleon fell, their deaths symbolizing the human cost of a conflict consuming the Greek world. With their leaders dead and armies exhausted, Athens and Sparta recognized the need for negotiation. The Peace of Nicias, signed the following year, was an attempt to end hostilities, yet the peace between these powers was as fragile as the ground where so many had fallen. With the dust of Amphipolis still settling, Athens and Sparta began to recognize that the war could not continue at its current pace. Both sides were exhausted, and a truce seemed the only sensible choice. After the battle at Amphipolis, both powers faced significant challenges. Sparta had secured important victories but was overburdened, and the death of Brasidas had weakened its military leadership. In Athens, Cleon's death created an opening for more moderate politicians who viewed diplomacy as a means to alleviate the strain of war. Negotiations were led by Nicias, an Athenian general and politician known for his cautious and diplomatic approach. He argued that a pause in the conflict was necessary for Athens to rebuild and recover. Sparta, likewise, was inclined to accept peace, fearing that a prolonged war might destabilize its Peloponnesian allies. In 421 BCE, representatives from both powers gathered to sign a peace agreement known as the Peace of Nicias. The treaty's main terms included cessation of hostilities. Athens and Sparta agreed to suspend combat for a period of 50 years. Restoration of territories. Both sides would return cities captured during the war to their original control. Release of prisoners. All captured warriors would be repatriated to their respective homelands. Recognition of alliances. Sparta and Athens acknowledged each other's alliances and pledged not to interfere with allied territories. The treaty was celebrated as a symbol of hope for the Greek world. However, unresolved tensions lingered. Many smaller city-states, particularly Sparta's allies, felt overlooked or betrayed by the terms. Additionally, mutual distrust between Athens and Sparta made the peace fragile from the outset. In the months that followed, the implementation of the treaty faced significant challenges. Resistance from cities such as Corinth and Thebes, which did not fully support the peace, created ongoing friction. Furthermore, the treaty failed to address structural issues, such as Athenian expansionism and Sparta's desire to maintain uncontested control over the Peloponnesus. Despite these obstacles, the Peace of Nicias brought a brief respite. Athens used the time to strengthen its navy and stabilize its finances, while Sparta reorganized its alliances and addressed internal matters. The Archidamian War, the first phase of the larger Peloponnesian War, left deep scars on the Greek world. The lands of Attica lay in ruins, and the plague had decimated Athens' population. Sparta, despite its victories, suffered from the loss of men and resources. More significantly, the war demonstrated that neither power was invincible. Athens had shown resilience by withstanding Spartan land invasions, while Sparta, despite its superior land forces, had endured humiliations such as the surrender at Sphacteria. The balance of power between the two cities remained, but distrust and resentment continued to fester. The Peace of Nicias brought silence, but not peace. Athens and Sparta remained vigilant, ready to react to the slightest provocation. This truce was merely a pause in the conflict. The seeds of future battles had already been sown, and the fate of the Greek world was far from decided. Though peace was officially achieved, the rivalries remained unresolved. Soon, new ambitions and strategic missteps would reignite the conflict, propelling Athens and Sparta into an even more devastating chapter of the war. The Archidamian War was a testament to endurance, strategy, and sacrifice. On one side stood the unyielding determination of Athens, defying overwhelming odds. On the other, the relentless strength of Sparta, which ravaged and challenged its rival. Yet, as we've seen, neither power emerged unscathed. This was merely the beginning of a struggle that would shape the Greek world. But while the Greeks clashed among themselves, a young leader was rising on the horizon, ready to alter the course of history. Just a century later, Alexander the Great would carry Greek ideals and ambitions to unprecedented heights, confronting challenges unimaginable to his predecessors. One of these moments of glory and determination was the siege of the city of Tyre. Imagine confronting a fortified city on an island surrounded by walls that defied the very sea itself. Alexander the Great not only faced this challenge, but overcame it with a resolve that redefined the concept of conquest. In the video, 332 BC, The Siege of Tyre and the Wrath of Alexander the Great, witness how Alexander's military genius and unshakable willpower toppled one of history's most impregnable fortresses. Click now to delve into one of antiquity's most captivating campaigns. Discover the man whose wrath and ambition transformed history forever. This is the next chapter of our journey. History is not merely a collection of battles and treaties, but a story of men and women who pushed the boundaries of possibility. From Pericles and Brasidas to Alexander, each left an indelible mark on the course of time. And you? Are you ready to uncover what happens when the impossible meets human determination? Let's embark on this journey together.